Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
Hey y'all, it's Darren. Welcome back to the Touch MBA podcast. I'm super pumped about this week's episode. I brought on Ana Archbold, who got her MBA from Michigan Ross, and Ana and I discuss the recruiting process to get into brand management or marketing management roles at top CPG companies. And even though this is focused on Ana's journey working for companies such as Unilever and Johnson & Johnson, where she currently is now, I think that all of you can really get some great insights into the recruiting process in general, what it takes to land that first internship, how important it is to perform during that internship, and how to leverage your business school resources to land your first post-MBA job. We really get into the nitty-gritty, the weeds of the entire process. So while I think companies' recruiting process might change over time, I think the fundamentals are still there. And I think you can get those through this conversation, even though the tactics might slightly change. I think the fundamentals to land a great post-MBA job and get on that path to a great post-MBA career are laid out in this episode. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. And just remember that at touchmba.com, you can get free school selection help. You can also find all our podcasts and a bunch of other free resources there to help you, find the best business school for you and, of course, get into these top business schools. So go check out our site, touchmba.com. We're just trying to be best in class in terms of helping you on this journey. I just want to make one disclaimer that, these are Ana's personal views. We talk a lot about the recruiting process at Unilever and Johnson & Johnson, but of course she's not representing those companies officially in a recruiting capacity. We just talk about her experience in the process. Okay, here we go. Ana, we met through a mutual friend, but could you let our audience know kind of your background?
Sure. So I've been working in marketing for over 15 years. My career started in advertising. I worked for McCann Erickson. As a teenager, I loved advertising, and it was just a personal passion of mine. I had decorated my walls with it was a mix of like grunge rock posters and advertisements, and I knew that was something I was passionate about and wanted to drive into a career. I worked in advertising for 4 years on very large accounts, including a financial services provider with media spend of over $100 million. And that was such a fundamental experience for me because I learned about not only how to turn out great creative, but also the idea of account service, which was the group I was in. And account service is an incredible foundation for a career because you learn how to work with so many very different personalities and talents to create award-winning work and bringing people together and understanding what it takes to get to great creative. But I realized through the exposure I had to different people in that role that my real career passion had gone from the creative that a consumer might see on TV or in a magazine to really creating what I call the 360 degrees of consumer delight. So, for example, with the financial services provider, I learned about the retail experience when someone comes into the branch and understanding how important it is to have ATM locations, things like that. And I realized that went very far beyond the work that I was doing to create an ultimate consumer experience. And I decided to go back to business school at the Ross School of Business to really get some general management fundamentals and start a career in brand management. I chose Ross because I would say it's an elite school that's not full of elitists. So it's a very collaborative work environment. It's a university that has a strong tradition of service, and that program also has strong ties to sustainability and the ideas of doing well by doing good, which is particularly motivating to me. I knew I wanted to have an international career. So coming out of Michigan, I chose to start my career in brand management at Unilever, where I worked in local, regional, and global roles. Most recently, I was at their headquarters in London for 4 years, working on an international role on a $4 billion piece of business and working mostly on innovation and global strategy. And I was recruited from that role in London to come to Johnson & Johnson to help form their global team on Neutrogena, which is their biggest brand in beauty. And that's what I'm working on today. I'm also currently in transition to working on a local role again, this time on the Aveeno business.
Wow. So, I mean, I'm sure there's so much in there because that has spanned, like you said, 15 years, right? But if we could focus on first your MBA experience, did you get an internship?
Yes, I did. I interviewed and got an internship at Kraft Foods working on their coffee business.
Got it. And so was it always kind of your plan, like how you mentioned, you wanted this ultimate consumer experience and you wanted to learn how to deliver that, applying to business school. So was it always your plan to jump into brand management or marketing management after your MBA?
My plan was more around landing a career in a role where I would be able to affect, again, those 360 degrees of consumer delight. So creating delight for consumers at every touch point they have. So as I went through the recruitment process, yes, I certainly looked at a couple of brand management companies, but I also looked at retailers and financial services companies that I thought could help me achieve that. Ultimately, I realized that the international piece, having an international marketing career, was really quite critical to me, and I felt that after reviewing the opportunities, brand management would be the one that would set me up the best for success. So even though I had an offer to go back to Kraft, I interviewed with Unilever because I felt that while Kraft at the time had companies in different countries, it was not a company that truly operated globally, and I wouldn't get an opportunity to go abroad and fulfill that that wish for an international career until much later. And I chose Unilever for those reasons.
Crystal clear. And yeah, I can't wait to actually talk more about that. It's something we haven't really discussed much on the podcast is, going for international positions from a top US MBA, because that's usually the other way around. Most graduates go into those top US programs, want to stay in the US. And I can't wait to dive into that more. But I'd really like to focus, this conversation on the recruiting side and get your experience, both as someone who went through that process and someone who is now helping your company hire MBAs. My first question is how important is that internship in terms of landing, your desired job post MBA?
The internship is extremely critical, and it's critical for a variety of reasons. So it's really important because it gives you possibly your first entree into that career. So you're trying to decide, is this what I want to do? And also, is this a place where I want to do it? It's extremely important to get that offer, even if you decide that that's not the place you want to go. So, for example, I had a great summer at Kraft. I had amazing managers, people I still keep in touch with today, but I realized that wasn't the best opportunity for what I wanted for very personal reasons. And I was able to go through the second year recruitment process with that additional confidence because I had had a successful summer, and I knew that if someone were to ask me, which they didn't, but if they were to ask me, did you get an offer, I could say yes. That's really important for your confidence, and it's really important for the interviewers on the other side of the table to know that you were able to have a successful summer.
No, absolutely. And so what do you think are the key factors to landing that internship, first of all, and then, the job, your first job after your MBA? Do you think it's classes? Is it clubs, the connections you make? Is it, working with career services? Because I'm sure we have many listeners who would like to do exactly what you did. So I'd love to get your opinion.
Yeah, I would say the funnel starts really early, which candidly I didn't understand when I started at business school. The Kraft offer I got because I was at an event the summer before. I was at Michigan and just was having a conversation with someone at a Kraft booth and mentioned to them that a company I had worked for had done some activation around one of their products. And I just showed like a genuine curiosity and interest in the product and the work that they were doing. And from there, I was invited to interview. So I hadn't been scheduled to have an interview, but I was asked to interview just because I showed up and was genuinely interested. And I can't overstate that point enough, that there are always so many people that are going to interview for any job. We know sometimes when people are interviewing as a safety or I'm going to go ahead and add this to my roster too, the people who have a genuine passion, interest, and knowledge about what your company is doing are always the people that stand out. Nobody wants to be your safety. Like, we don't want to be your safety pick.
Right.
We all work really, really hard, and we want to make sure that people are genuinely motivated by what we're trying to do for the consumer and the business. So I would say, like, that's the absolute number one thing, is to know and understand the business as well as you can. And there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. So on campus, there's traditional recruitment touch points. So if a company comes and recruits at your school, making sure that you show up, even if it's not the division of the company, making those connections, because companies are, even though they can be quite large, they're also quite, the recruitment circles can be quite small. So for example, I work for Johnson & Johnson. Say, for example, Johnson & Johnson shows up at your school, but it's not Johnson & Johnson Consumer. It's a different part of Johnson & Johnson. Go meet with those people, find out what the parent company is all about, and it's very possible that those people can help you get a linkage into the consumer part of the company if that's what you're interested in. Something else that seems basic but is really important and helped me a lot was going online and finding out more about what the companies are saying externally. I had, when I was interviewing for Unilever, a very good friend of mine, her father did business with Unilever on the procurement side, and said, if you go on their website, it's amazing how much information they have about their intent for the future and what they're doing. So in addition to annual reports, looking at things like the speeches that the CEO was giving, or just any other work that Unilever was doing out in the marketplace, really helped me to understand what this company is about. Like, really, where is this company trying to go in 5 and 10 years, and do I want to be there with that company? So it's something basic, but not something that everyone does. Like, read the annual reports, go online, watch the videos besides the recruitment videos. Also, off-campus events. So if there are special interest conferences, for example, if you're interested in sustainability or something like that, going to those and making touch points with individuals that are in that arena and finding out about how those companies show up or what they're doing in that space. Alumni, at the time when I got my job with Unilever, they had not formally started recruiting on campus. So I had to really dig through the alumni database to find people who had worked there, because there weren't many people in the class above me that had exposure to that company. And that was really invaluable. And I have to say, I had to try really hard to convince them, like, can we really talk? This is something that's important to me. But those conversations made a lot of difference. And then absolutely, I would say career services. In the recruitment space, we talk to career services a lot, and they can give you great insight into what the company is looking for, how the company may have changed over the past few years. We, on this side of the table, also talk to them about what's our reputation on campus. Why are people interested or not interested in our company, and how has that changed since last year? So I would say those are really the best bets, but start early. Don't underestimate the importance of starting early.
Wow, that is so much to go through. I love that. I mean, you mentioned that the passion is really important, and the interest, right, in the company. And you outlined all these different ways that applicants, or students, I should say, can build more context for when they apply to these jobs. I mean, is it just something you sense when you're interviewing candidates that it's there? Or, I'd just like to hear more about, like, from you, what makes someone seem authentically interested about your company?
Part of it is like a certain level of excitement, but a bigger part of it is, what is the depth of knowledge? How much does this person understand about what they might be doing day to day, what our company is about, what our vision is about? Does this person in the interview or in conversations Are they making it clear that they're staying up to date with marketing, that they understand the space that we work in? So it's more, yes, there's a basic level of enthusiasm, but it's really how well does this person understand what they would be doing, and are there questions and comments reflective of that?
Absolutely. And so it seems to me that it'd be really hard to have that level depth of knowledge with many, many companies. So I'm trying to get at, how many companies were you targeting or talking to during your recruitment process?
Yeah, I was really focused. I would say there were maybe 4. And I think that's really the key. What I witnessed when I was in business school is I had a lot of friends that didn't know what they wanted to do. And so they were just like, you always saw them in their suits. They were always interviewing. And it's not a numbers game. So those were always the individuals that, at the end of the year, didn't have any offers, right? It's really much more important to say, this is what I want out of my career. These are the companies, establish the criteria, find what are the companies. And sometimes the criteria might have nothing to do with your career path. It may be I know for family reasons, sure, I need to live on the West Coast of the U.S., right? Yeah, absolutely. Make that criteria, find the companies that meet that, and then just be really laser focused on going after those opportunities.
That's exactly the process I encourage applicants to use to narrow down business schools. But yeah, just for jobs. So in terms of, let's say, Unilever, what were they looking for? What do you think companies like Unilever, Kraft Foods, Johnson & Johnson, what are they looking for from hires, aside from that depth of knowledge that you mentioned?
I remember one of the people that interviewed me for my job at Unilever said this to me, and it's so true. When they interview, they're not looking for their next ABM. They're looking for their potential directors. So you want to see across
rewind to ABM?
Oh, yeah. So when you enter into brand management, your first position is likely going to be assistant or associate brand manager.
Got it.
So that's the role that you would be in your first job, in your first assignment, or you might be a summer associate brand manager. They're not looking for a great ABM. We're looking for people who are going to have the ultimate potential to be great senior brand managers, directors, and VPs. That is the most important thing. It's really important to build strong teams and to have great talent. And that can't be overstated, because once you have someone in your company, you want to coach them to be even better, and you don't want to coach them on weaknesses, right? So you want to make sure that you're being extremely selective to get people who are not right just for this role, but for future roles. And I think that's super key. In particular, the types of skills that we're looking for is really first about being able to lead. So people who are good learners and leaders, people who are capable of creating strong teams and galvanizing people, and people who want to keep learning and growing. It's really important that we take on people who are really receptive to feedback. So people who know that things can always be done better, are open to that, and willing to make changes in how they approach situations to have next level business performance. And people who want to be really moving into the future with us very boldly. So the environment is always changing. The marketplace is always changing. I would say this is an incredibly dynamic time for anyone working in brands and consumer goods in particular. We need people who are thinking about this not the way it is today, but how it's going to be in the future, because the future is coming very quickly. And most important, saved it for last, but most important when you're talking about a brand-facing role, we're looking for individuals who are passionate about the consumer and want to win. And we can't win without winning with the consumer. We can't win in the marketplace without winning one-to-one with every consumer. And given the complex and changing environment that we all live in, it's not about mass communication. It's about how do we go to one-to-one conversations with consumers about their purchases and the brands that they're connecting to.
I mean, that's amazing. So many of those seem like soft skills: leadership, creating teams, self-awareness, taking feedback, moving into the future boldly, being passionate about the consumer. Is it important? How important are the quote unquote hard skills of, say, marketing when you're doing the recruiting?
So the hard hard skills, I would say, are always teachable.
Yep.
And I think if you're in a strong MBA program, you've probably got those. Like if you made it into a top program, you probably got those. They are really important in your first roles in particular. You're probably going to have a rotation as an associate brand manager when you're in a role that's all about analytics. So we are looking for individuals to be able to see the complete picture of what's going on in the marketplace. So classic brand management question for a summer associate is, let's say you work on the ABC Bagels business. ABC Bagels sales are down. What do? You have a meeting with your senior brand manager in 2 hours. What do you look at? You want someone who's able to understand all the different facets of what could be causing a performance decline in your business. And that requires being able to think through the frameworks and what are the different levers that create growth and challenge our business. But that's all super teachable. And hopefully by the time you get through a business school, you can do that. And we're going to ask you a question like that during the interview for sure. But the things that will make people successful over the long term is on top of that are the things that I stated earlier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And gosh, you had me sweating with that question. I was like, oh man, do I have to answer this? What am I going to say on the podcast?
I literally had that question during my Unilever interview.
Yeah. So could you walk us through the actual recruiting process? So Unilever would come to, say, Michigan Ross, where you were, and then actually conduct the interviews on campus?
That's changed a lot. So when I was at Unilever, that was very much how we did things. Now at Johnson & Johnson, the approach is quite different. We will have, and I think it's also just different because of other manufacturers and companies are doing things differently as well. We will post the role. So Johnson & Johnson will post the summer associate roles, and there will be drops on campus. So students can drop their resume and apply for the jobs through the traditional career services website and portal. That we also, I believe, post them just externally. So if you're not at one of the core schools for Johnson & Johnson, you can still apply to be considered a summer associate. One thing that I would say has changed, in particular at Johnson & Johnson, we are now recruiting summer associates, and we pick our full-time hires only from that pool. So at J&J, our current process is you need to be a summer associate if you want to come join Johnson & Johnson. We will not be recruiting second year. And that's different at different companies, but I could also see things evolving to that being more and more how more companies are working.
Why do you think that is? Is it just from sheer resources and, maximizing your recruiting resources sort of thing?
I think it's wanting to be very targeted in how we're bringing people in, but we also want to give people the opportunity to get that jump start. And again, the funnel everywhere is starting earlier. The process has really shifted. From after the resume drop, there will be hiring managers who will look through the bundle of resumes. So, this year I got a bundle of resumes from the Michigan students and look through them, and you prioritize who you'd like to meet with. Usually schools have a bidding process. So say, for example, we say, we'd like to meet with these 5 candidates. We have 8 slots for interviews. Students will be able to use a points-based system to bid on the remaining 3 spots. Then someone at the brand manager level or above will meet with those students to help to isolate who are the strongest candidates and who makes the best fit for Johnson & Johnson. And then offers are awarded.
Got it. And then, sorry, continue.
Just to answer one of your other questions, the interviews now more and more are happening over the phone or video conference.
And then, so for example, for those summer internships, the MBA students, all the interviews are done virtually. They don't have to visit the office, quote unquote.
They don't have to visit the office, but there are opportunities for them to visit the office. So there is usually a sell day where we invite applicants to come to J&J after they've either accepted, or sometimes depending on where we catch them in that funnel of recruitment, it may even be before they arrive on campus. So they'll have an opportunity to interact with and possibly come to our sites. We also typically send current employees out to the school. So for example, 2 weeks ago, some of the Michigan alums at J&J were back at Michigan for an alumni, actually a BBSA, Black Business Student Association conference. So we're there. We show up for a variety of different types of events like that throughout the year. So it's also really good to have reached out to find out who the recruitment lead is for the company that you're interested in, and find out, like, hey, when are you going to be on campus? Can I meet with you when you're here? Are you going to have large-scale opportunities for students to meet with you, or can we possibly connect over coffee?
Just to rewind a little bit, when you're going through that bundle of resumes that you're initially sent, because the process is, like you said, happening earlier and earlier, I mean, how important is it to already have some experience in that industry? Would that help give you a little bit of an edge in terms of getting shortlisted for those interviews? Or are you looking at other criteria as well?
I think there's always an unconscious bias that people have to want to hire people who've had this experience, right? That would be super ideal. I can hire somebody that's already done some of this before. Yep. That is actually, I really try to not do that. When I'm reviewing the resumes, I want to see a cover letter that explains to me, if you haven't been in brand management or marketing, why? It's really important to me that someone have a very clear story about how they got to this career switch. And then also when you're looking at the resume itself, being able to highlight what are the skills that are transferable. Yeah. So I'm sure you guys talk about this all the time on your podcast, but it's really helping us to understand, what have you done previously that gives us the confidence that you could do a great job here. And it could be things about, having a great analytical background, being very good at running cross-functional teams, consumer-facing work, things like that. So it's more important to hit on the transferable skills and show your impact, specifically you, not your team, but what did you accomplish in your roles prior to business school that makes you stand out. It doesn't need to be CPG brand marketing or advertising, but I need to have confidence that in your prior roles, you made a significant business impact in whatever you were doing before.
No, that's awesome. And then in terms of the interview itself, could you walk us through a typical structure for that interview?
Yes. You're always going to tell me about yourself. That's always going to be the warm-up question. Yeah. So have that story down. Again, it's really important for the student to be able to explain to the interviewer. So, okay, you were an engineer. Why are you in? What's the bridge between your prior experience and what you're asking for today? And make that super clear, genuine, and believable. It's also important that there's a fit with the values. So we want individuals who are clear on what Johnson & Johnson's values are, or whatever company you're interviewing for, and making it clear that you understand those and that you would be a good fit to live into those. At Johnson & Johnson, the focus is, on serving the doctors, patients, and nurses first. It's a healthcare company, and really making an impact on consumers' health. At Unilever, it might be more focused on sustainability, but it's really important that you're able to understand what that company is trying to do and that you show why you're a fit for that. There'll be a couple of case questions. The bagel question from before is one that you'll get in some shape or form. And then also they're going to want to know about your leadership skills, opportunities that you've taken, what you do in addition to when you're not working, how do you add value to possibly to the community, what else are you doing? And also opportunities to talk about a time when things didn't go as planned. So really understanding when you're not at your best, how did you recover from that? What did you do? What happened? And all of these are always best done, in the context, action, result. So we really want to understand, what was the business challenge or context? What did you as an individual do differently? And what was the result of what you did? That's what we're looking for.
And how many of these interviews do the first years have to go through at Johnson & Johnson to
2 rounds.
2 rounds.
2 rounds.
Yeah. And they're quite similar in terms of the structure?
Yes.
Yes. Do you guys ever look at GMAT scores?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have to ask that because, as I'm sure you can remember, that's such a huge focus for so many applicants. I know like consulting, sometimes they look at those scores and they're looking for students with 700 and above, I've heard. But okay, I had another question here. So
I would say if you have a 700, like if you have a great score, put it on your resume.
Yeah. Right.
Don't hide from a great score.
Yeah.
But I've never been in an interview where I was asked about how well I did. And I actually have a lot of friends in consulting who also were never asked about their grades or about their GMAT score. It's really about how do you show up in the interview? How do you prove your past and future value?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so let's say you land that internship with Johnson & Johnson. Then like, how are those interns evaluated in terms of getting an offer, a full-time offer?
Yeah. So I have not, full disclosure, I have not supervised an intern during my time at Johnson & Johnson. So I'm not able to give a lot of detail, but I
appreciate
can
that.
give you I can give you a sense of what the companies are broadly looking for. Every intern will have projects. Generally, you'll have two. This was the case also when I was at Kraft. So you'll have one larger project, and you'll have a smaller one. And usually, the way I've seen it at the companies I've worked at, one is more broadly about innovation or a true marketing, consumer-facing type of work. The other one may be more analytical, still consumer-facing, but for example, you might have a pricing study that you need to do to evaluate what should our pricing be. But your main project might be around, hey, we need to reposition Band-Aid. How would we do that? What are your suggestions? And you'll have, over the course of 10 to 12 weeks, you'll have the opportunity to work with a broad team on creating a presentation that will have your business solutions and what your recommendations are. It's really important to get there that you're meeting with the right people. You need to isolate who the people are that are going to help you have a successful summer, both your project but also your visibility in the organization over that time period. So making sure that when you land, you're talking to your manager about who are the key people I need to be connecting with for my project and beyond. And there are milestones that managers and the students will set. So there's always a midpoint review at any company. You can get a sense by the midpoint of your internship how you're doing. And then you'll get that assessment. So you'll know if you're on track and you'll know if you're off track. And, being off track, I had a great friend of mine that I interned with who at her midpoint was not on track, ended up being very much on track at the end of the summer, took a full-time offer there and had a great career. So if any of your listeners end up in a position where they're not on track at midpoint, please know that that's not a throwaway. There's always opportunity to correct. But that's generally how they're structured. We want to find individuals who are great at coming up with solutions and resourceful about how they get there.
No, that's like such great insight. I mean, are you guys also looking for stuff outside the workplace as well? I mean, does that sort of bleed in? I mean, in terms of like, during the MBA program, that's extracurriculars, right? But I mean, so maybe the equivalent of the extracurriculars, like when you're working. So leadership skills that you see outside the job, team building skills that you might see like outside the office hours.
So where the outside the office stuff comes in is, where it might link to your company's values. Like, what is this person choosing to do outside of work? Outside of the office stuff might be really helpful if there's a gap on your resume. So where professionally you haven't done something, but you're working on that in an external capacity, right? So maybe you've in the past done a consulting engagement, prior to, in the break that you had before business school. I would talk about that. That's really where those types of things matter. In terms of extracurriculars at school, I think it's important for us to know that candidates are capable of handling more than just their coursework. And so it shows that this person has, a variety of interests, that they're developing those professional interests beyond the curriculum, and that they're also contributing to an environment of learning and growth. So that's really what's important about being a part of these clubs and organizations, is that you're proactively giving back and creating this cycle of learning in your school environment. And that's really very important.
And can you give us a rough idea of how many of those interns end up landing jobs? I mean, is it like roughly half or a quarter, or is it dependent on the role, or how does that work?
In the past, I'm trying to remember, at Johnson & Johnson, there have been some summers where, and I think this past summer was the same way, there are spots for everybody that interns. So we go in
That's
and
awesome.
I think the internship is general, but not every company does that.
Right.
So some companies may have a policy where there are 10 interns, we probably won't be able to give 10 offers. And then it becomes really competitive. Usually companies will give you a sense of that at the beginning. It's a great question to ask.
Yes.
And I would say we're very selective about who we choose because we want to, have a great yield. We want to keep as many of those great people as possible, and we want to make sure that they're set up for success. So on the whole, generally people have had very successful summers at J&J the past 2 summers. I don't know the exact numbers because again, I haven't been directly managing any of the interns. But more often than not, people are coming through with an offer at the end of the year. There's also a lot of involvement by where I have been very involved is just coaching a lot of our Michigan interns. So making sure that they are vetting their presentations and ideas with people outside of their business. So we do that a lot where we'll have a Michigan intern, again, not somebody that we're direct managing, and we say, hey, let's get together and let's review your presentation a couple weeks before it's due to be turned in and presented, and give them feedback and offer them touch points because we want them to be successful. So there's a lot of coaching that happens both with your direct manager but also the people around you. And again, that's why it's so important to get a lay of the land and understand who's here to go above and beyond to help me, because those people are there and everybody wants you to have a successful summer.
That's really cool. I mean, is that organized by Michigan Ross or by Johnson & Johnson has the different alums work with the current students?
That's up to each individual school, like each alumni team to do. I don't know that all of them do it. I think it's a very Michigan thing to do. It's a very Michigan thing to do. But I think also the culture at Johnson & Johnson is incredibly positive. It's like the most positive place I've ever worked. And that's a very J&J thing to do.
And so I also want to talk about working internationally and, applying for those sort of jobs. Before we focus on your story, would you have any advice to international students applying for US internships or US jobs? I know it's tougher for them because of the visa process, but I'd love to hear any insights you have there.
My first insight or recommendation would be for that individual to think about, why do I want the U.S. experience? And when is it important for me to have the U.S. experience? And I ask that because it is increasingly challenging for students to get that U.S.-based experience right out of the gate. It's not impossible. And again, by being focused, you really can improve your odds. But it's really a question about why do I want this? And does this need to happen now? All of the companies that I've worked for since business school have offices all over the world. And in each of those offices where I've worked in the U.S., I've had a lot of international people around me. So that means that one of your options is actually going back to your home country or your home region, finding a great job with that company there, and then getting seconded, which is there's a term called secondment, which is when they send you over, or an international assignment from your home country to the U.S. And sometimes that will offer you a greater opportunity, and the company is more willing to make that investment in you because you've already proven that you're a strong performer in your home country. That is always a fantastic option and is something that I think people should really consider. Think about what the right timing is. Some other suggestions for people who might want to do that sooner. One is to try to get that work experience in the U.S. while you're still in business school. So you mentioned an internship. That's great when you can get one sponsored. I understand it's a very low percentage of companies now that are doing that. The other is a lot of the elite business schools have some type of consulting engagement. At Michigan, we have a MAP project. A lot of our international students chose to select projects where the companies and the opportunities were based in the U.S. So it's a 6-week engagement as part of the school curriculum, you can get that opportunity to make connections with a company that's based in the U.S. and have U.S.-based work experience. So it was usually the domestic students wanted to go abroad, and the international students were really interested in staying put. And I think that is really smart because you have that U.S. experience on your resume. The other is to consider broader rotational programs that can get you in-country experience, even if the sector or the company is different. So, for example, sometimes these large companies will have a rotational program, and it might not be all 3 rotations are in consumer marketing, for example. If your priority is just on getting U.S.-based experience, then you need to rank, like, is it that I want U.S.-based experience in consumer, or am I happy to have any U.S.-based experience with Johnson & Johnson? If so, do they have a rotational program that will afford me the opportunity to work for this type of company in another sector? Because ultimately, you'll get the experience and the learning of working in the U.S. market with that company, and you'll also it will be so much easier for you to forge relationships with people in the local business that you're most interested in. So it's really about thinking not about the next step, but ultimately where do you want to go and finding what are the different paths that you can get there. And I think those are some of the ones that I've seen work best for individuals.
Thank you for sharing that advice. I mean, I think a lot of international students, especially non-native English speakers, might be a little more wary about entering, for example, or trying to find jobs in, say, brand management or marketing management in the US, even with a great business school or MBA degree. But you mentioned that a lot of your colleagues are international colleagues. Have you noticed that to be a barrier in your industry? Like, basically non-native speakers working in marketing roles, even if their English is great.
So I'm having a challenge understanding your question. Can you help me to understand a bit more what you're driving to?
Yeah. Sorry. I think I was jumping all over the place. So basically, a lot of business schools have told international students, I live in Vietnam, right? So I go to a lot of the business school presentations, and they'll often say that for international students, it's tougher to land marketing roles in the US because English is, often their second language. And of course, the visa issue. So I just wanted to see if you had any experience there on the ground with that. Is that clear?
Yeah, I think that's horrible. I think that's horrible.
Of course, it's horrible, right?
But I honestly think that has not been the case at places I have worked. Right. So the visa issue is real, and it's very challenging. That is true. The part about being a not native, and I have a great sensitivity to that because my husband taught English as a second language, and my family immigrated to this country from a non-English speaking country. Maybe I look at it through a different lens, but I've never heard that in the 10 years I've worked in CPG. I've never had anybody say, we don't want someone because English is not their native language. There are you need to be able to communicate in English. But assuming that your English is strong and that you can present well and write well in English, I'm floored at that comment.
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear. I mean, that's encouraging to hear, I'm sure, for many of our listeners. And then, so if we could talk about your journey working for Unilever in the UK. Did you immediately go from business school to that post?
No, I worked in local and regional roles in the U.S. before going to the UK. So I was at Unilever for about just over 3 years before going to the UK as an expat. What was really crucial and what was very helpful was that I always made it very clear to the organization, to the people around me, what my ambitions were, and that included an international assignment. So all of these large companies will have a development plan where you're going in and you're saying, this is what I want for myself. These are the types of roles that I think would help me get there. In my development plan, from my very, very first development plan at Unilever, I listed my career ambitions and I said I want an international role. And I actually ended up getting that role just because I had a conversation with someone. We had someone from the global team who was visiting us in the U.S. from She was living in the Netherlands at the time. And we were there at a workshop, and I was trying to navigate my career just internally in the U.S., not thinking about an international role, but just getting her advice about building a long-term career in the category that we had worked in, as she'd always had. Her experience at Unilever had always been in the same category as well. And I just mentioned to her, there was no motive there, but I just mentioned to her that at some point I would love to go international. And at the end of the visit where she was there with us working on a workshop, she just said to me, I really enjoyed working with you. I have a spot that's coming open on my team, and you mentioned that you would be open to living abroad. Is that something that would interest you? So it was the perfect marriage of the organization already knowing that I wanted to do that and the right opportunity coming up at the right time. And so I was able to move. They were building a new global team for part of their foods business, and everyone was going to start being located in London. And London is a big deal if you work at Unilever, because that was their headquarters. And it was amazing. It was an amazing experience to be there for 4 years and to work on a global piece of business of that size.
That's awesome. I mean, and did you find a lot of other American colleagues out there too?
Yes, there were a number of other expats there as well, but there's also there are tons of people there from all over. It's a very global company. There are people there from Africa, Asia, everywhere.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I think you just, you gave the key there is, letting the organization know from the start that you're interested in international assignment. I mean, could that sometimes work against you? Like if you're asking for something like that early on, in the recruitment process, or do you think it's okay? Like they want to know that?
No, I think you need to be really clear with people about your expectations all the time.
Yeah.
However, you should also expect that the organization is going to be like, that's great that you want that. Why you? You need to be a strong performer.
Yeah.
You need to be a strong performer. You can't say that you want these things without having strong performance.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And they will measure you against that.
Yeah.
They will say, if this is what you want, then you need to deliver this.
Yeah. I mean, this has been one of my favorite interviews, actually. I just want to ask you one final question, which is, any last advice you have for MBA students trying to break into this space and in the recruiting process in general? I'd love to hear it. My advice is to be really clear on what you want. Be really clear on what your ambition is and what drives you. Be genuine in your applications to business schools, and keep thinking about what you want as you build your career. If I think about what I wrote in my application for Ross, it was all about, I want to do well by doing good. Flash forward 10 plus years, it's still the same. And I think that's why I've been really successful and had a career that I'm really proud about, because that's always been the driving force. I also think that's why I've done very well in my interviews when I've interviewed for these different companies, because I've been so focused and I've been very genuine in pursuing what's really motivating to me. So spend the time before you get to business school thinking about what you want, and make the time once you get the job to reflect on, is this still what I want? Thank you, Ana, so much. Let's end it there. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Really appreciate your time and insights. My pleasure, Darren.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your number one school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.